You're listening to Unleashed with the Dacxi Chain, hosted by Andy Pickering. Hi folks, it is Andy here. Welcome to Unleashed with the Dacxi Chain, a Dacxi podcast where we learn all about the Dacxi Chain and the incredible opportunities it unlocks. Let's get on with the show. Hey folks, welcome to Unleashed with the Dacxi Chain. It is Andy here. Hey, this is episode 1 in a special 3-part series that delves deep into the revolutionary world of Dacxi Chain, which, as you know, is an advanced crowdfunding solution, which is led by a very dynamic CEO, Mr. Ian Lowe. And today I am joined by Ian. Ian, of course, is overseeing the imminent launch of the Dacxi Chain. So, this 3-part series, we're really going to learn a little bit more detail about all things Dacxi Chain. Very exciting. So in this the first of these 3 special episodes, we're really going to try and lay out the context of what the Dacxi Chain is trying to achieve in this evolution of global equity crowdfunding. We'll learn about the Dacxi Chain genesis, and of course, we'll learn all about the vision of the Dacxi Chain and Ian's vision as CEO. Welcome to the show, Ian.
Great to be with you, Andy. Excited to be talking about where we're going.
I'm excited as well, Ian. So I think, look, we better just dive right into it. So just to kind of set the context, I suppose, for the first of our 3 special episodes, let's just hear a little bit about your personal journey, Ian. Please share a little bit about your background and what led you to join the Dacxi Chain team and will take up the leadership position as CEO.
Yeah, look, I'd be glad to. So, look, I've spent the better part of 30 years founding, co-founding, running and growing technology businesses. So principally software businesses, but software businesses that operate in a range of different industries, including media and digital media, finance, sustainability. And the common thread in all of those businesses is really first of all, as a growth enabler. So I naturally gravitate to high growth business opportunities and take a very hands-on approach to being a catalyst for realizing that growth and getting businesses on a high growth trajectory. But also along the way, I've been lucky enough to really innovate in different industries, both as a co-founder and also a founder, and also being brought in as a professional leader or a CEO into existing businesses. So it's really about technology, it's about high growth, and for me, it's very much about innovation. The opportunity to innovate is something that appeals to me greatly on a personal level. The opportunity to reimagine an industry, to empower an industry to realize its true potential. These are all things that I find really attractive in a professional context.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. And I'm sure we'll learn much more about your journey in the course of these 3 episodes. Look, I said we'd set some context, Ian. So you've set a little bit of context in terms of your path and your role here at the Dacxi Chain. It'd be good now if you could set some context in terms of, what are the main challenges that exist within the current equity crowdfunding framework, and how do these limit its potential so far?
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk to that. It may not surprise you that we've spent a really significant amount of time delving into that and really understanding it. So, look, there are a couple of sort of headline constraints for the equity crowdfunding industry, if you like, today. And so when I talk about the industry, I'm talking about equity crowdfunding globally. And I should also, just for the sake of context, make it clear that we're talking about equity crowdfunding. So crowdfunding does exist in other flavors. There's community crowdfunding and debt funding and things of this nature that still tap into the resources of a crowd. But what we're talking about here specifically is probably the most prominent of all of those, which is equity crowdfunding. That is many investors investing typically smaller amounts per investor to take equity or shares in a privately held growth business. So a business looking for growth, it needs capital to realize that growth, and a crowd of investors will invest in return for equity or shares in that business to empower it to grow. So if we look at, again, very broad brushstrokes, if we look at the global equity crowdfunding industry today, the first thing that I think is really important to note is that depending on the numbers that you reference, but they all generally agree, that today is about a $1 to $2 billion industry per annum. Okay. Now that sounds like a big number, but when we compare it to the amount of growth capital being invested by VCs or venture capitalists, it's somewhere in the realms of 1% or less of capital that's being invested by VCs. So in other words, the seat that equity crowdfunding has at the table of funding the innovation economy, which is ultimately what this capital is doing, it's funding innovation, funding growth, is a very insignificant one. And it plays in the broader scheme of things a reasonably insignificant role. Now, clearly the businesses that raise capital successfully through equity crowdfunding would take a different view, and that really speaks to the potential of equity crowdfunding. So the first thing is to set the scene and say, well, look, at the moment, it's less than 1% of the innovation economy. Now, why is that? 10 years ago, I think a lot of businesses were created, some of which still exist today. Equity crowdfunding platforms that said, this is the new frontier on the innovation economy. This is the new path to capital for growth companies. But as we sit here today, whilst it's grown from nothing and continues to grow incrementally, its participation in the overall scheme of things is really modest. And so there are really a host of underlying issues that speak to why. But there are two really headline issues out of that sort of 4 or 5 contributing factors. And the two headline issues are the following. The first is that equity crowdfunding today is almost by definition a local market proposition. So what we mean by that is you've got a platform that's gone out and acquired a license to operate, because Dacxi Chain, we only operate in a licensed context, and in almost all regulated markets, you must have a license to operate an equity crowdfunding platform. So they go to the trouble of getting that license, and then they set about doing two things in parallel. The first is to go and speak to lots of early stage companies to understand how they can service their requirements around access to growth capital. Companies that need money, they're constantly out there talking to those companies, trying to attract them to their platform to build a catalogue of investment opportunities. And then on the other side of that same platform, they're looking for investors. This is the crowd. They're looking for individual investors to come in, register on the platform, open an account, and start to participate by investing in some of the catalogue of opportunities that they're bringing to that crowd. So that ecosystem or marketplace is a silo that operates almost exclusively within a single market. And if you think about it, that actually makes very good sense. I mean, how is an equity crowdfunding platform that sits in a particular country logically going to convince companies that don't exist in that country, or their executive team are not based in that country, that they need to use a platform in a different country to their own to actually go and raise capital? It's very problematic. And of course, that's why it just doesn't happen. And then similarly, when it comes to building the crowd, building an international crowd is theoretically possible, but the reality is that it requires significant capital, significant effort, and real marketing skill successfully build a crowd of active investors. And so inevitably what that means is that the local equity crowdfunding platform is also sourcing their crowd locally, because doing that across multiple markets, being based in a different market is again, highly problematic. So what you end up with, if we sort of draw the lines of the equity crowdfunding industry, is a lot of disconnected, independently run local crowdfunding platforms. Now, at face value, that may not sound like a problem, but it's actually a really big problem. And in many respects, we believe it's the most fundamental problem. And it's the reason why equity crowdfunding today is less than 1% of the innovation economy. And that is the following. If I want to invest in a business that I think has good prospects, I will do it based on a basic understanding, or better, in other words, maybe not just a basic understanding, but some previous experience or knowledge that I bring. I will do it on the basis of that knowledge. In other words, a business that might be selling some highly specialized medical device, the average investor is going to struggle to get to a point where they feel like they truly understand the problem, the solution, and the opportunity that that solution creates. And so what we need on the investor side is we need real scale to get to a point where more and more and more individual investors have enough confidence that they understand the investment opportunity because they understand the underlying business to then participate in the crowdfunding. And so where you've got a local construct with local issuers or local companies, growth companies, only raising money from local investors, that scale is just, it's very, very difficult to achieve. So in scale on the crowd side of the equation is a fundamental barrier to equity crowdfunding realizing its true potential. So that's on that side of things. But then of course, there's also this chicken and egg dynamic whereby the richer the catalog of investment opportunities, the more attractive it becomes to the investor. So on the supply side of that same equity crowdfunding platform, you've got deals that are only sourced locally, which means there's only a certain number of those that are viable for equity crowdfunding. And so, of course, that constraint means that it's much harder to get the crowd to participate and to recruit them in the first place. So you've got this chicken and egg dynamic, all of which wrapped up means that there's a lack of scale in equity crowdfunding today, that if that can be resolved, if we can offer equity crowdfunding genuine scale, the opportunity to become truly global, we think that completely reimagines what's possible for equity crowdfunding. So that's a very long-winded point one to a two-point answer to your question. The second constraint is really around liquidity for the investor. So at the moment, if I want to invest in a privately held company, the one thing that I understand when I invest is that I don't know when I'm actually going to get a return on that investment. I just have no idea. I don't know what the time frame is. I don't know what the harvest is going to look like. Now, more professional investors would suggest that is the romance of investing. But of course, for the average everyday investor, that creates friction in the process and it erodes their confidence because they can't see a clear path to a harvest. And so what we've always believed is that the innovation of blockchain, which is borderless and allows any kind of tokenized asset to be traded on secondary markets freely and easily, blockchain completely removes that constraint. So we get to a point where we're saying the two biggest problems are lack of scale, because it's a local siloed proposition. And secondly, a lack of liquidity for the individual investor, the solutions to which are, let's make equity crowdfunding global so it has the scale it needs both on the investor side and on the supply side. And secondly, let's tokenize that equity so that the investors that hold that equity have a clearer path to a harvest at a time frame of their own choosing. And so that puts them in a position of far greater control. So look, that's a very long answer, but hopefully that speaks to the heart of the constraints that the industry face today.
Yes, indeed it does. Thank you, Ian. So if that's the case then, so we've heard your views on the main challenges that are holding back the current existing equity crowdfunding model, and a little bit of detail on how the Dacxi chain will start to address that. I said at the beginning, Ian, that we'd also learn about the genesis of the Dacxi chain. So I suppose just in this first episode, we should include a little bit from your perspective on the origin story, if you like, of Dacxi chain from its genesis to where it is today. Just a brief period of time before the imminent launch. So yeah, tell us the story.
Yeah, look, I'd be happy to. And look, I won't take you through every twist and turn, and because there's been plenty of those. But look, about 6 years ago, the world's first tokenization conference was held in New York. And that conference really was the creation of the idea that became the vision for Dacxi Chain. This idea that tokenization will, over a period of time, really change the way that we think about acquiring, holding, and disposing of assets. And the tokenization, like the internet was in sort of 1999, just before it became ubiquitous, we're very much at that same point in time as it relates to the tokenization of assets. And the tokenization of equity in privately held businesses would revolutionize the opportunity for investors to participate in the capital that must be raised by those companies. So it was really 6 years ago that the seed was planted. And from that very first insight, there's been a number of iterations to the development of the Dacxi chain vision and mission, and more recently, the business model itself. And I think there was also an appreciation along the way that it was too early, 6 or 5 years ago, or even 4 years ago, in the life cycle of tokenization to feel confident that we could go to market with a solution and be that far ahead of the adoption curve, right? At some point, you really do need to synchronize the plans you have for your own growth with a broader understanding and acceptance of the underlying blockchain technology generally. And so we're now at that point where, you know, a lot of people hold crypto, a lot of people understand that blockchain is relevant to asset classes way beyond just crypto, and that digital finance, digital money is the path that we are on. And nothing that Dacxi Chain does can change that. But our opportunity is to participate by leveraging that change. And so the time frame that we set ourselves really was to say, look, 2023 looks like it's going to be the right time for us to launch this solution. And what that gave us was, in some respects, the luxury of time to really do our homework on the state of the industry, talk to some of the established equity crowdfunding players to understand their challenges and opportunities, take a really close look at how the technology on those platforms operates, really delve into the regulatory frameworks in different parts of the world, because there are common elements across all of the regulated markets when it comes to equity crowdfunding, but there are also unique elements in each market. So understanding that landscape was really important. And then, of course, going out and building a really detailed understanding of the requirements that we needed to satisfy, building the technology, engaging with foundation partners, and getting in position to launch. So that's sort of a quick version of what's been a long history with plenty of twists and turns. But what I can say is we sit here today with a level of understanding about our solution, the problem it solves, the technology that underpins that solution, and what the future of equity crowdfunding really needs to look like. A level of understanding that we just simply didn't have even 2 years ago. So that puts us in a good position and gives us, a lot more confidence.
Got it. Thank you, Ian. So as we finish off this episode, then what can you tell us just in terms of dates that people should be aware of, or just give us a sense of some of the next steps in the arrival or launch of the Dacxi chain?
So look, we've got some enormously exciting milestones coming up in the very near future. So we've already confirmed June 28, which is the launch event. We're going to also announce as part of that the time frame or the specific date on which we'll announce the first deal. So the first deal has been earmarked, and all of the detail around that has been worked through. So we'll be in a position at launch to announce the date on which we will tell everybody on the first deal. Shortly after that, that first deal will open. It will close a handful of weeks later. And at that point, we really will be in a very exciting position, because we have every expectation that will be a very successful first deal. And really at that point, what we've achieved is we've validated the technology. We've validated it in partnership with market-leading, fully licensed equity crowdfunding platforms that have a run rate and an excellent reputation. The investment funds will have flowed between multiple parties through Dacxi pipes, and the issuer will have received the growth capital they're looking for at the end of that first deal. And just as importantly, the investors that participate will have received their equity. So all of that's really important. And of course, wrapped up in that is we'll have clear, unambiguous evidence of the Dacxi coin use case, which is really as a transaction currency in this Dacxi chain ecosystem. And so at that point, really, we turn to two critical bodies of work. One is expanding the network with more and more equity crowdfunding partners, and we're going to do that really aggressively. So there's a big body of work there. I'm going to be directly involved in that myself and looking forward to that. And then the second stream is really around iterating the technology to continue to provide more and more features to individual investors and the partners that use that Dacxi chain technology.
Got it. All right. Thank you, Ian. Well, folks, this was just the first of 3 episodes of Unleashed with the Dacxi Chain podcast that we're producing and publishing in support of the launch of the Dacxi Chain, which, as you've heard from Ian, is coming up June 28, very soon. So that's episode 1. Today we've just talked about a bit of context in terms of the problems that have been holding back the real potential of the equity crowdfunding movement. We've learnt from Ian all about the Dacxi chain genesis, the origin story. We've heard about his vision as the CEO. Now for our next episode, we'll learn more about the power of the Dacxi chain itself, the network effect that is going to drive the Dacxi chain forward. So that is all coming up in episode 2. But yeah, we reached the end of episode 1 in our 3-part series around the launch of the Dacxi chain. See you real soon, Ian, for episode 2.
Thanks, Andy.